So we're live, are we, Roxy? Good to go. Okay. Welcome to the Delic Sessions. Is AI eating the world? Let me tell you, the Delic Sessions are a series of fortnightly webinars with a panel of experts focusing on the inner workings of the music business, uncovering problems and asking how we build towards a better future. Delic itself brings together the essential elements of the modern music industry. It's a cloud-based digital project organizer. It has automated rights management built in and an artist profile hub to manage songs, share music, and build your business. My name is Vic Galloway. I'm a BBC broadcaster. I'm an author, journalist, and musician, an all-round music nerd. I'm delighted to be your host. So, is AI eating the world? NTS Radio recently said, as the algorithm takes over, real community is more important than ever. So our fifth Delic session sees today's panel discuss the way AI has rapidly changed our relationship to music in terms of consuming and producing it, and how we can perhaps make the tech work better for everyone. Let me introduce you to our expert panelists. First up, Anna Betancourt, who's co-founder and head of sound innovations at Black Goblin. Her focus on art and experimentation, as well as an eclectic background, has shaped Black Goblin's ideas. Anna has delved into the realms of science, technology, and art, and she'll often come up with challenges that use sound as a medium and science and technology as tools to find solutions for creatives every, their day-to-day issues and every day and what they need to sort out. So welcome, Anna. I'll get you to chat about yourself in just a few. Next up, we have Ted Koterwas, who is the Delic Chief Technology Officer. He's an artist, musician, and software developer, designing and delivering web applications, mobile apps, and digital installations for nearly 2 decades as well. He recently led the development of numerous innovative of Oxford, having previously directed new media exhibit development at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. As the CTO of Delic, he's involved in the application of machine learning to create musical metadata for developing next generation collaborative creative tools. Welcome, Ted. We'll get you to talk all about those tools in just a few minutes. Next up, we have Cliff Fluet, who is on the Delic advisory board. Cliff joined Lewis Silkin LLP as a partner in April 2006, after over a decade as in-house counsel in the music and broadcast industry. He's also the founder and director of 11, a music advisory company working with disruptive music business models in the world of digital media, film, and sport. He lectures on AI and advises different companies on the subject. So welcome to you, Cliff, as well. And finally, Delic CEO, musician, media consultant, internet pioneer, Scotland's former head of technology, John Maxwell Hobbs. John's worked at the intersection of art and technology for over 20 years. Great to have you all here. Thank you for joining us for the fifth Delic session. Is AI eating the world? We'll get into it in just a second. But Anna, tell us a bit about Black Goblin and what you do on a day-to-day basis, and maybe how you got into the industry and so on.
Yeah, of course. Well, hi, everyone. I am the co-founder and head of sound innovations at Black Goblin, which is a company dedicated to all things sound. Although it might seem a little bit, generic, but we are all about improving sound in different ways by offering our services to the film and the game industries and pretty much anyone trying to do something creative with sound. By researching and developing new technologies and processes just to make sure that everyone has access to the highest quality sound possible. And of course, by, we're fueled by collaborations as well. So I have a background in audio engineering and a master's degree in sound design. A lot of interest in digital signal processing. That's where the whole idea for our new technology that we're developing at the minute came up. For trying to build sound effects that people could access from the comfort of their homes, which actually turned out a really good thing during the lockdown. Yeah. And yeah, this is really all that we're about. So we're not kind of reduced to one thing. It's just more about making sure that there's a kind of, we like the word democratizing sound for creatives.
Well, Anna, it's lovely to have you. Ted, tell us about what you've done. You've done all sorts of different things as well. And you make music as well.
Yeah, that's true. So Yeah, my background is in art, really, and music as well. I was trained as a drummer and a percussionist, and but then went to art school and started doing art. And basically, my interest in technology really came through, or came about in trying to do art with it, and that's just led me down this path. With AI, I became interested probably 5-6 years ago when, again, hearing a different drum track actually, and thinking, wow, that actually there is something there, and then starting to read up on things and seeing, AlphaGo beat the world champion and that sort of thing, and starting to see what the real power there is. And so I've experimented with it in a number of different contexts. So one of it would be one app that we developed was computer vision, where you can point the phone at an object in a museum and then get an augmented reality version of that object on your phone, right? And training that was remarkably simple, at the time, and it really showed me that as an artistic tool, this is becoming more and more available to lots of people. Right? I've also worked with natural language processing for the interpretation of the Wycliffite Bible. I've been doing some work with GANs to create images of things that never existed. And with Delic, we are starting out very, very basic at the moment to try to extract some basic metadata from audio files, but we will be expanding that. And this is important, we'll be expanding that in sort of consultation, not only with ourselves as musicians, but with the members who join Delic, see how we can expand our use of AI to help them with their creative endeavors. And
sure.
So
yeah, I'll definitely ask you maybe towards the end of the discussion, maybe more specifically how AI is playing a role in Delic and the creation of the platform and so on. Cliff, tell us about your life and career and what you do day to day.
How long have you got? No, I'll keep it short. So I have been in and around the world of digital music, probably from its inception. So I arrived in the music industry in the mid-90s, having qualified as a lawyer and been at Warner Music and been one of the first people responsible for new media back then. So I got to see the arrival of various new technologies and new platforms in real time. And I can tell you it was painful. I spent many years in broadcast, perfecting digital broadcast. And then over the last 15 years, I've worked with pretty much every kind of streaming service, mobile service, music service that you could care to name. In 2013, I met a company called JukeDeck, who were a Cambridge-based artificial intelligence generative company, and became an advisor to them, and that company exited to TikTok. And then ever since then, I've been pretty in deep when it comes to the world of AI. So I work in adaptive AI, generative AI, shape-shifting AI, music video AI, AI royalties, AI on-device for tracking, pretty much every flavor of AI. So one of the things that I do spend a lot of time focused on is the business applications of AI to music, rather than what tends to suck a lot of the focus and concern, which is about AI generation. That's not the thing to worry about.
Oh, you've already used the worry word. The robots are coming to get us. Thank you very much, Cliff. Your expertise is going to be absolutely amazing in this discussion. And finally, John, it's been a while since we chatted on Zoom. Tell us all about your journey as well.
All right. Well, as with all of the founders of Delic, I'm also a musician. I've been making technological music and just sort of physical traditional music for years. Also worked as a sound engineer and producer, particularly in New York back in the 80s and 90s. So in the 80s, working in the club scene, working with rock and roll bands, with house music artists, with DJs, people like that. Then in the 90s, moving into the avant-garde world, working with people like Philip Glass, Laurie Anderson, and a whole range, Laurie Spiegel, other people involved in technology. Been interested in the nature of machine intelligence for a long time, way back when I was a student at Indiana University. Professor there, Douglas Hofstadter, came out with a book called Gödel, Escher, and Bach, which took me about, I think, 15 years to finish reading. But I've read a lot of his thinking in that area, and then also working with people like Todd Mackover, producing some performances. He's at MIT, the Media Lab, and he does things with what he calls hyper instruments and has created musical instruments that are based on neural networks. So human interaction then gets a machine accompaniment to it that is changing and variable. And I'm always particularly interested in humans, well, and other things as well, crows for one, as users of tools. And AI, is something, and we'll get into it in the discussion, in the nature of, tools and how we use them.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's great to have you all here. Let's just start with a wide brush stroke. I'll start with you, Cliff. Why has our world become so dependent on algorithms? That's the word that everyone hears. Oh, it's the algorithm. It's the algorithm. Why is everything run by one now?
Well, essentially, algorithms are great at optimization. They're great at processing huge amounts of information. And, they are, in and of itself, they are tools. They are things that are run by human beings, but they are very, very clever. And what you'll find is that most of the most successful businesses on the planet use them quite a lot. If you're a retailer and you want to know why Amazon is so successful at what it does, how it's so efficient, how it's able to serve you what you want to get at each particular moment, it's really, really important. And really, the algorithm isn't magic. It is technology, but it's very, very clever technology. And its applications, when it comes to things that are as mathematical and or wide and, emotion-inducing, such as music, as it were. There are some people that like to see them as polar opposites, but actually music, for many of the issues that the music industry faces, as it were, they're perfect machine learning problems. So to a certain extent, algorithms aren't just going to eat everyone and kill everyone. They could actually save us. It really depends on what we do with those tools.
Yeah. Ted, you sent an email ahead of this discussion, and one of the statistics on the lines you put in it was the BBC did a poll and said that 53% of people polled don't trust algorithms to make decisions that affect them. I mean, that's obviously over half the population. Is this just something that they're becoming aware of things all of a sudden and they're scared? What can you explain that?
Well, there's a couple of things really. I mean, so most recently we have the exams debacle where the government had to backtrack and it judged. Well, it had a real world impact on lots of students who had conditional places to universities, and they missed out on that. And the algorithm was really, really ham-fisted. It was not a good algorithm. And the reason, one of the big problems we have with algorithms is that the objective of the algorithm, and whether that's the human objective of the people who are deploying it, or the objective we give the algorithm to accomplish, is often misaligned with the people that it actually impacts. Right. And so in that case, with the exam scandals, for example, you had students impacted. They had nothing to do with the design or the decision to even use the algorithm. Their interests were to get into university and to be judged fairly. That wasn't part of the objective of the algorithm. The algorithm was to try to bring their scores in line with historical data. And who does that serve? That serves nobody. Maybe off-call because I can say, okay, this wasn't an outlier every year. So the main problem here, and it's the main problem with the algorithms that determine whether we get insurance or a mortgage, or the algorithms that determine in the future, AI that might run away because its objective is different from ours. And it's key here. It's not just from ours; it's from the people it actually impacts. There are lots of great algorithms out there from the perspective of businesses that, it's optimized their work, but it's done so at a cost. And that cost is a human cost of people who've been denied mortgages unfairly, who've been not able to get insurance, or whose insurance premiums are really high just because they happen to live in a postcode where there's more traffic accidents.
So
Anna, I think it's that sort of thing that people are starting to realize. And you've got, things like Tay, the racist Microsoft chatbot, right? And people are starting to see that, oh, wait a minute, this stuff is happening. And I think there is a pushback against it.
Right. So yeah, Anna, I was just going to come to you. Do you think there's some kind of rebellion against the algorithm then?
Well, it's really fascinating for me because actually, and I should have mentioned this, but I was trying to be really concrete. I actually have a background in robotics. Before I kind of swapped my major to audio engineering, I was studying robotics, and I recall ever since then, which is more years than I care to admit ago, there was already a discussion in regards to the acceptance that people had. We're talking right now about something that is quite abstract. No, the algorithm is an abstract thing, something that lives in a computer. But even before that, even in literature, if you look at everything that Asimov wrote, for example, there's always been this fear of technology taking over over human, over the humans. And I think it's just something that gets really exponentially exacerbated once that you have a technology that is working and it's in place. So I personally, and this is just a point of view, I don't think it's just waking up right now. It's just something that it's always been there, that fear from the times that we became, industrial and things started to just exponentially go really faster than we could keep up in terms of technology. And that's always scary, no? Something that goes faster than you. So I think it might come from there, yeah.
So we're kind of becoming more aware of these things, and also we can communicate faster and globally within microseconds now via social media and so on and so on. So we can spread our concerns or worries about certain things. John, how do you feel, just in a sort of vague way, about the creeping importance and sort of omnipotence of the algorithm? Are you scared? I mean, and going back to Ted's point, there seems to be good and bad algorithms applied for the right and wrong reasons by the looks of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's about the application of it. You have to remember, algorithms have been around longer than computers. And, people have been using algorithms in the insurance industry, actuarial tables, things like that. Those are essentially algorithms. An algorithm is just a set of instructions. In music terms, if you're a drummer, a paradiddle, that's an algorithm. Right, left, mm-hmm. right, left, left. Mm-hmm. It's a set of instructions. It's not telling you which things to hit with your right or left, mm-hmm. or how fast or whatever. That's an algorithm. It's just, where are you applying it? And if you're applying it inappropriately, you'll get an inappropriate answer. Now, and what computers do now is it just allows us to run algorithms really, really fast. Mm-hmm. And all of us have had this sort of experience that despite everything to the contrary that we're confronted with every single day, people seem to believe that technology is always perfect, always fast, and always cheap. And it's none of those, because it's the old computer programmer line, garbage in, garbage out. And you could have the most brilliantly written algorithm, but if you feed it the wrong data, you're going to get the wrong result. And as Ted pointed out with the schools determination, maybe you fed it the right data, but you asked it the wrong question. And so we still have to think about, what's the tool we're using? Is this tool being used for the right purpose? Take it away from computers. Is a screwdriver the best thing to drive a nail, or is a hammer? I mean, you can drive a nail with a screwdriver, but the result isn't going to be very good. And you can drive a screw with a hammer. Result's still not going to be as good as if you use the right tool. So ultimately, you've got to think about, are you using the right tool?
Cliff, I see you nodding away furiously during some of those comments. Do you want to add anything in there? Oh, I think you're muted there.
Sorry, the most 2020 line that there is, right? I think that the idea of understanding this as a tool is probably the key point. It's often when I'm lecturing on this, I have a single image of a hammer and just say whether or not you see this as a weapon or you see this as a tool really depends on which end of the nail you are and how you use it. So very much, and in the music industry, an industry that's somewhat has a strange relationship with technology. All of these things are mischaracterized almost immediately as a threat. You know, the early Queen albums said, you know, no electronic instruments were used on this recording.
Yeah.
For years, Top of the Pops and Equity wouldn't, and Musicians Union wouldn't allow synthesizers. You know, we've seen this over and over and over again. This is the same with drum machines replacing drummers in relation to sequencers, in relation to studio works, etc., etc., etc. I once had the misfortune, stroke privilege of doing a presentation on AI at Abbey Road, and it's fair to say I was nearly lynched. I know it's a fairly by an angry mob of
analog tape users.
Yeah, and they were like, "How dare you come here and tell us the technology?" And I said, "Yeah, how dare I? In the home of technology, in the building that stereo was invented, where four geniuses felt that the music that they heard in their head, influenced by the likes of Cale and Stockhausen, could only be replicated by a machine. How dare I?" Mm-hmm. And that actually that this fairly, you know, pearl clutching response to it, it doesn't amuse me at all. It doesn't interest me at all. And more importantly, what it does more than anything is represent what the opportunity is. So, for example, we have EDM. Do you know what the E stands for, guys? And, you know, no one would dare. Well, exactly. You know, so this doesn't work. And, you know, the idea of samplers and sequencers, as it were, you know, there's a genre called hip hop. Why? Because it's sampled from the first ever sample from another track using technology. So virtually every time what it has done is led to more flowers blooming, more opportunities, more democratization. And the fact that it's not perfect, the fact that it can create ersatz music, as it were, one can do that with Logic Pro or anything on any of our laptops right now. So I'm not impressed by that argument, yet it seems to be used in order to allow perfection to be the enemy of the good. And it is based upon some sort of Terminator view of the future, as it were, by people who are, I don't know, carrying a phone that's listening, by being in a kitchen with a device trained upon them, some of them with televisions, with cameras that are trained on them as well. So I'm not sure that AI music is the one to be terribly terrified about, unless, of course, one allows it to be. You know, for me, I think the question is are musicians going to use this as the ultimate palette to create the ultimate art? Or are they going to be fearful of it and turn their back on it and take a fairly patrician and or backward view of it?
Well, say what you mean, Cliff. Excellent. Great to hear that, because I mean, I suppose is all sort of progress, you know, to be applauded? Are there things to be slightly concerned about here and there? Who knows? We can get into that. Before we get into actual music creation using AI, I have to tell you, if you hear a squealing sound this room, so I apologize. I've actually tried to shut the door and she's just not having any of it. So if a snaffy jumps up on me in a minute, I apologize. Can I just say to people watching at the moment, there is a Q&A box. If you want to ask a specific question, we're going to go to, the last 10 minutes of the discussion will be a Q&A. Any of your questions that you want asked, please pop it in the Q&A box. And if you have something really in depth that you want to be answered in real detail, then email the website. Email hello@delic.network. hello@delic.network. This is the 5th Delic session. Delic.network is the website to go to as well to find out more. Okay, let's talk about algorithmic playlists. This is the thing that infuriates musicians to a certain extent and is loved by music consumers. Are algorithmic playlists kind of useful for just casual music listeners? Surely they serve a great purpose in that way.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. So what is a casual music listener, and how does the existence of casual music listeners impact on those of us who care quite deeply about music and those of us who produce music. I mean, I think there is a reason to sort of look at music as a sort of utility, like water. Is that, I'm going to go for a run, so I'm going to turn the run music tap on, or I'm going to, do some work, so I'm going to do the work music tap. And those are sort of playlists, and I think we might have to, as musicians and as creative people, we might have to accept that, yeah, in some ways music is a utility. And if that's the case, then where does that leave us who value not just, the stream of water, but actually, each little drop, and how can we can't necessarily make other people value it in the same way we can, but perhaps there is through education and through exposure to the way these things work, we can make those who maybe are somewhere in the middle care a little bit more about the process, and to see a process that's a bit more advantageous to not just the listeners, but also the people who are creating the content as well. And I think that's the big thing. I mean, for me, it really does come back to this idea of alignment, that right now, the musicians who create music are at the pointy end of that nail at the moment, and so how do we give them the hammer? And I think that's where we need to be really focusing our attention.
Anna, do you have any concerns about, sort of playlists and how more and more people are turning to them, and the fact that AI is ultimately choosing what people listen to?
I actually find really interesting, and going a little bit back to some of the concepts that John and Cliff were talking about in terms of a design, having a design problem and having, the way things are designed, that is ultimately, and Ted also mentioned this extensively, that is ultimately what is taking control from creatives. And that's really interesting because we have a company like Delic or like Black Goblin, where we are, companies who are starting to develop technology in this realm. So it's not really about being scared of the algorithm itself. It's really about like where our responsibility as technology developers lies in creating software that makes creative process and also creative listening a more enjoyable thing. And I go back as well to kind of the disposable aspect because of speed, as a consequence of speed, of how fast everything develops. And it kind of, makes me think a little bit about maybe in a naive point of view, but I do think that maybe it's something more about focusing on the bias of the algorithm itself. One of the main points of concerns with playlists and all of these things is that new artists struggle a lot to come in those and to be kind of heard by people using them. But it seems to me really obvious that has to do with the bias of whoever's programming this. Might not be like that. Like I said, maybe Cliff, you have a different view, or Ted, but
well, can you explain that when you talk about the bias of someone programming it? What does that actually mean? I mean, in layman's terms, for someone like myself,
right.
Are they feeding in certain amounts of or certain types of information that other people wouldn't think about? Explain it if you could, Cliff. You look like you could explain that to me.
Well, I think one of the things, not to burst anyone's bubble, is that the vast majority of music, to a certain extent, is certainly scheduled by computer, just to make sure that things aren't played in, the right proximity to each other as well, but also based upon data, based upon audience research, be that auditorium research, be that feedback, be that chart positions, et cetera, and they are getting more and more really interesting. There's a company I work with, Platinum Innovation, who do a lot of social listening in order to understand what people want to listen to. So a lot of it really depends on how simple or complex one wants it to get. It's what is the whole world listening, or with something like a service which isn't available in the UK because of licensing reason, Pandora, where human beings have deconstructed music, created a genome, a kind of essentially a DNA of all music, and essentially creates a highly, engaging in terms of the stats for people who access Pandora, is a fantastic listen. Or you've got the likes of Spotify, which by acquiring a company called the Econest, created an opportunity in another business called This Is My Jam, launched their Discover Weekly. And perhaps it's a coincidence, But if you want to look at the growth, the sort of the massive sort of J curve in terms of adoption on Spotify, once it adopted a radio-like experience, because that's how most people want to listen. Now, is it the best tool for discovery? Don't know. That really is something that needs to be done, can be drawn into wider contexts. But there are companies that I'm working with who have on-device AI to protect your privacy, to understand the context you're in, and will choose the context that you want to hear. There are other businesses that will use social listening in order to understand what you've got. There's another business I work with called MyPart, who have artificial technology that not only understands metadata and beat and genre and all those things that many of the social listening, AI listening companies out there, but also has trained its algorithms to understand the taxonomy of the beauty of lyrics. So it's very much more about the how rather than the what, which creates an opportunity. And, you know, quite famously, there's a headline, you know, Tom York hates Spotify because it tells him that he wants to listen to Muse. And I can tell you right now, that's the last thing in the world that Tom York wants to listen to. But, you know, and that's the issue, which is actually, how do you move away from the what as to the how?
Well, I mean,
why?
I'm a complete music nerd. As you can tell by the ridiculous collection of physical copies of music behind me, there's another wall behind this screen that you're looking at and so on as well. You know, and I have terabytes worth of WAVs and I'm, you know, I subscribe to streaming platforms and so on and so on. However, the algorithm never gets me. It never gets me, honestly. It's no, I don't. And maybe the Radiohead Muse comparison is one of them. Yeah, we won't go into comparing band against band, but is the old-fashioned radio DJ that perhaps, like myself, that plays a sort of personally curated playlist of tracks, some of which will blow your mind and some of which will potentially really annoy you. I mean, last night I did a radio show and lots of great feedback from listeners, really nice. And then I played, admittedly, a fairly extreme band called Cardiacs. And I had people complaining about it, which in some ways I quite enjoyed. It meant that it had connected with people. But is that you know, kind of personally curated playlist idea and someone telling you about the music, is it over, like in the long term? I
don't think it's over. I think the audience for that is
dwindling,
possibly dwindling because of the availability of music as a utility on Spotify, the ability for me to just turn on something that is good enough for what I want to do. You know, so there's that aspect. But I want to go back to the bias aspect, because I think what was missing in that discussion is that in determining what you're going to be looking for in the algorithm, how the algorithm weights different types of data. For example, the number of listens as something that's important in determining whether the next track gets played to you. You know, and that goes to Anna's point about emerging artists and new artists, that, you know, there's a bias there against them, you know, already there in the algorithm determining what music to play.
Anyway, yeah.
Sorry,
it's all about the data, no, in the end, the data you're feeding in there.
Mm-hmm. But how will the bias change then from one person's coding to another's? I don't quite understand that.
Well, it's not necessarily about the coding. It's more about how you design the algorithm and what the algorithm is weighting. You know, I mean, for example, so Spotify uses 3 things, well, as of 2018 that we know about, use 3 things. One is collaborative filtering, and that's basically saying, well, if Vic, you like A and B, and I like B and C, I'll probably like A and you'll probably like C. You know, and it goes back to sort of the last FM days, right? So that's one way. So it's looking at your history of listening, and by liking, they tend to use the fact that you listened more than 30 seconds. And so, see, that wouldn't have counted because that was too short, right? But if you listen to something for 30 seconds, apparently you like it, right? So that's one thing, collaborative filtering. The other thing it does is it looks at the audio itself, right? And so it goes and it will find similar audio that has similar characteristics, you know, as it does as it processing. And then the third thing that it does is it acquired Echo Nest, which goes out and it looks for words associated with various tracks and various artists in social media and music blogs and that sort of thing. And all those are combined to generate your Discover Weekly playlist, or what plays after you finish listening to one artist and there's nothing else to play and they need to keep playing music. So all of that goes into that. Now, I have no idea how those get weighted, right? And I have no idea if, in the algorithm that's doing the collaborative filtering, whether it also takes into consideration how many times I played an artist. Not just that I played them, but I've played them over and over and over again, and you've played them over and over and over again, right? And then, the C that it recommends to you and the A that it recommends to me, those also need to be ones that have been played over and over and over again, right? Where does the new artist fit in, right? A new artist might fit in with the audio analysis, but that's only if they weight that very heavily. If they're weighting plays very heavily, that is biased against new artists and creates a problem. One more thing on bias before we tend to think of, at least in our discussions in Delic, looking at machine learning and applying that to audio tracks, there's sort of the purely technical characteristics of audio, right? Your bit depth, your sample rate, those sorts of things. And then there's the semantic ones, which get into emotion and all sorts of things that we bring to the music and interpret with music, right? And on that scale, there's a point at which culture and our bias being from Western culture and our bias from liking certain types of music and certain genres, starts really playing in to how we design the algorithms to do that. Beats per minute, key signature, those seem fairly technical, don't they? Right? But those are very Western notions of music. Genre, what is world music versus rock and hip hop, so again, our sort of cultural biases tend to creep in even at that level, even at this scale, or this part of the scale. If this is technical and this is semantic, right? And then the training data that we put in, obviously you've probably read lots of things about image recognition, with white faces being recognized and non-white faces not being recognized. So, it creeps in lots of different ways, and that's why we have to be, one, transparent about what we're doing, transparent about how the algorithm is being developed, involve a diversity of people in both collecting the data, making sure they're represented in the data, and designing the algorithm, and feeding back in. The problem with a lot of algorithms right now, and especially those that are using deep learning and neural networks, is that it's very hard to know exactly what's happening inside. You can look at the input, you can look at the output and say something's wrong, but to know exactly where it's wrong, we don't know, right? So that's many of the ways in which you can get biased AI and biased algorithms, biased playlists, and all of these sorts of things.
That's absolutely fascinating, and that's exactly the answer I wanted as well. I actually feel like I understand it now. Has anyone used the sort of dashboard, if you like, the behind the scenes artists approach to, for example, Spotify for artists or whatever, when you're feeding in the information or you're ticking boxes, what your new track or your new album, John, perhaps you've come across this before, and you have to sort of choose 3 genres and you have to choose 2 or 3 moods, and we all know that this is kind of feeding some data into an algorithm, which is going to then help your music connect. Excuse me, I'm going to have to put my dog in a different room. John, maybe you could talk about that, please.
Yeah, there's a whole aspect of that. I mean, when you're talking about genre and categories and things, and this is once again about the use of a tool and sort of what question you're asking. And a lot of these algorithmically generated playlists are trying to serve you up more of the same. And that's a difficult thing. I mean, it's fine if you don't want the music to intrude, if you're having a dinner party or doing a workout, or, but if you're looking to be engaged by music, it's not taking in any of those factors. It's not taking in the factor of surprise and surprise through connections of networks. There's great example from a BBC Radio 6 show, Iggy Pop, Iggy's show. I was listening, and it was really interesting to me because it was somebody I'd worked with in the past and actually hadn't thought a lot of. I mean, talented guy, but salsa artist Eddie Palmieri. Now, very talented guy, was a heartthrob, but as kind of mainstream as you could imagine. And I was kind of surprised that Iggy played him. And then he went into, immediately after that, a piece of classical music. And then he came on and talked about how the fact he chose those two pieces of music because Eddie Palmieri had been a child prodigy on the piano and had studied classical music. And even though he wasn't sort of in the avant-garde salsa like Ray Barretto or guys like that, if you listened closely to what Eddie was playing in these mainstream songs, but listen closely, you could hear that there was a depth of musical knowledge in there. Mm-hmm. Now that's something that I argue that most current algorithms will never give you because it's not looking for that. Mm-hmm. It's not looking for a cultural connection. I'm not saying that they can't ultimately, but at the moment they're looking to, I mean, I've never been surprised by a song in a playlist. Mm-hmm. I've maybe enjoyed it in a Spotify playlist or something like, oh yeah, that's about right. But it's like, I really, really, really want to go from, track one of Music for Airports into Motorhead's Ace of Spades. I mean, I like that. But the algorithms are designed to not do that.
I like that too. And I also have to say, I really like Iggy's Six Music show. Hats off to Iggy and his producer, because I do want to hear jazz 1 minute, hardcore punk the next, classical music, some grime, whatever. But I do feel that maybe not everyone has that kind of exploratory desire in music. Cliff, I was going to turn to you because what John was saying there, the idea of algorithms not really challenging the listener, not really surprising the listener. I'm not sure you completely agree with that, or you think that things might.
No, I do. The concern is, though, is in all ways, not everyone is like us. Mm-hmm. You know, the vast majority of people want to. The essence of great radio is surprise and delight. Okay, and that's what the radio programmer would like to do that. But if you listen to any commercial radio station or any major mainstream stuff, or you don't talk about specialist shows on specialist channels, as it were, the music is chosen centrally, and it's done because people actually don't want that surprise. Mm-hmm. They want delight, and that's what keeps advertisers happy. That's what works in relation to commercial radio and the vast majority of public radio, which competes with that. So the real question is this works for everyone. So this is your Subway, this is your McDonald's, this is your takeaway meal, as it were. But actually, really, the question is are algorithms best for discovery, for that surprise and delight? Not particularly, but it can be done. It really can be done. It's just the vast majority, they're aimed at giving people what they really want to listen, which is, I tune into the station because they know what I like. Whereas people would like to say, well, I tune into John Peel, and I tune into Iggy Pop or to Vic Galloway because I want to listen to what he listens to. Now, I think we're all grown up enough to know that in majority of radio shows, people aren't allowed to pick the music. Mm-hmm. And the same is true in relation to do that. It's the same at a disco or at a wedding. You say to someone, right, okay, you take the decks and you start playing. Right? Yeah. It's much more difficult than anyone else imagines, and that was one of the issues with regard to Spotify.
But just to throw something political into this, just all of a second, if we're talking about whether it be, commercial radio stations playing people safe, bland, middle of the road music or whatever, and then we're kind of alluding to the fact that by and large algorithms that you're going to like, and are we not in danger of living in kind of echo chambers, bubbles, where we're just going to hear the stuff that we like, we're not going to be challenged? And you could even, sort of talk about that in a kind of political way. For me, growing up, hearing reggae and African music on John Peel's show, for example, blew my mind and opened me up to that kind of music where potentially I might not have heard it anywhere else. We're now living in a time where people are getting their political opinions from their echo chamber, and they're not necessarily willing to welcome in the other opinions, and so on and so on. I'm just trying to draw a comparison.
No, I completely agree with that. And, you know, the way that algorithms have weaponized social media is a whole nother Zoom. So we should probably possibly keep that into it. But to bring it sort of screaming into 2020, the thing that's banjaxing most radio programmers and indeed labels is, why the hell is that at the top of the charts? And it's normally because it's blown up on TikTok or Triller. And it's blown up algorithmically out of nowhere as people sit there and scratch my head and say, why the hell is Matthew Wilder and Break My Stride going? I think this week it was Lily Allen's Smile, just came out of nowhere. So actually the irony is that there's more surprise and delight coming from these algorithmically led platforms, but they're just not necessarily DSPs or radio. Okay,
well, we could talk more and more about playlisting and these sort of things, but I would like to actually talk about music creation. Anna and Ted, I think you are specific experts on this. Let's just talk about the use of AI when it comes to creating music. I assume you're using or perhaps even designing tools which will help music creators, you know, invent new tunes. Anna, how is AI sort of being involved in an kind of way? I mean, Cliff touched upon things earlier on, but maybe just sort of open that discussion a little bit.
Yeah, well, I come more from the sound design point of view, which is obviously a different area than music. Although my background it is on music recording, but right now we've been focusing more on creating tools precisely that make creatives or filmmakers, people who work 1-2 people team, you know, just the 2 people working, and that require really high quality sound, but just don't have the means to obtain it. AI has recently become a really important thing for us because we come from what's called the physical modeling synthesis world. So we are creating algorithms that reproduce a real life sound. So if it's a clap, I'm just reproducing it by an algorithm code, but how do we make that independent? How do we give users that independence to use it? And that's where AI comes into play. So if we're talking, for example, about a filmmaker, how do we use elements from computer vision to help them make some of the processes of creation, which are more technical, automate, you know, to make it more automatic? That's really what I mean. So all of this, of course, for us in the kind of sound realm, that means that the way we're designing our tools is to make sure that the more technical kind of, if you may, boring aspects of sound creation can be aided by this technology, which is really powerful. But by no means what we are designing is meant to basically get rid of creatives. In the opposite, our tools are focusing on, just getting all those things that take so much time away from you, that waste money, resources, and human resources, so that you can actually go to the nitty-gritty of being creative, being an artist, basically.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. Ted, you were talking again just swiftly before we started broadcasting today about hearing an AI drummer that was kind of stunning to you. Tell us a bit about how AI is kind of creating, the human touch, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing, if no one's checked out Magenta, which is Google's music creation technology, basically using AI to generate all sorts of different things. And it's been really interesting to actually watch that. I started experimenting with it, a few years ago with the drums RNN, right? And so it's a way, and this is this sort of ongoing project. I have to try to teach an AI drums in the way that a human drummer would be taught. Basic patterns first, and then nuance and that sort of thing. But to be fair, they've gone way past what I could ever teach because of the processes they're using. So you've got some pretty impressive drum tracks, and if I was a guitar player or a piano player, I'd probably be saying the same thing about some of the things that are being produced. That it's a sort of feeling of nuance and this feeling of some sort of human touch, you know, and it really has passed this sort of musical Turing test on individual instrumentation. You know, I mean, you get up to symphonies created with AI, and it's really not quite there yet, or entire compositions. But if I can go into a creative tool and say I'm not a drummer, or say that, you know, well, I'm certainly not a trumpet player, you know, and I envision a trumpet track, you know, brass would be really good here, you know, to be able to have to have something recognize, you know, the key signature, and to recognize, you know, the melody and the structure of the song, and play something reasonable over it that actually sounds good and is in support of. And I think that's the other key thing, is that a lot of the compelling stuff is compelling because it's playing a supporting role. You know, in this track I heard, the drum, it was definitely not a drum-centric track. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, this was to, you know, support the main creation, the main composition, and the focus was really much more on singer and songwriting than it was the drummer. But it was a quick tool, which meant, you know, they didn't have to pay a session drummer, and that's one of the problems. Though, is there's lots of session drummers out there that, you know, could have gotten a small gig out of that. So that goes into this whole issue of automation, and, you know, macroeconomically speaking, you know, one of the ways that they answer this sort of idea that, oh, well, you know, AI is jobs obsolete. You know, the answer to that, and as much what Cliff said, is like, well, no, it's going to change those jobs for the better, you know. But the problem is that if you're a session drummer, you know, you want to be a session drummer. You don't want some new AI job or AI enhanced job. You want to be a session drummer. You know, that's what you want to do. And there's a lot of creativity in that. There's, you know, a lot of value in that. And, you know, if that market is disappearing, if your opportunity is to be that way disappearing, then you've got a problem. I mean, it goes way back to, you know, so the classic sort of copyright theft sort of thing is you know, the funky drummer who, you know, was sampled and resampled and sampled. Well, at least they got paid for the gig. At least they got paid for the session. Now they're not even getting paid for the session. Mm. So we've got a real, you know, real issue there. Yeah. But anyway.
Well, I was sent a link the other day, an OpenAI link. It's OpenAI Jukebox, and there's an incredibly complex algorithm which is replicating entire bits of music. So it's drums, bass, guitar, keyboards, whatever is in there, plus the singer with lyrics. So they would take someone's back catalog and feed all the data in, the sort of lyrics, reams and reams of lyrics, loads and loads of different tracks that artist has made, or that genre of music. And then the algorithm spits out something which is very, very recognizably that genre of music. It's not absolutely perfect, and some of the lyrics weren't making sense particularly, but it was damn close. Cliff, are we looking at that becoming more of a reality? I mean, does anyone have to sing in tune, keep in time, you know, actually have to come out with a creative idea in the next couple of years? I mean, will the algorithm just write your top 10 for you?
Yeah, it's a question I'm often asked, and I think it's in the chat as well. You know, it's like, when will it happen? And I always say, when? Mm-hmm. And then everyone shifts uncomfortably on their seat. And the idea, but, you know, I mean, everything from the Banana Splits to the Gorillas to the Archies, etc. The idea of, you know, sort of so-called fake artists. Actually, one of the things that I found particularly offensive was when Spotify was paying for producers to create music for playlists, sort of relaxing, etc., etc. This blew up into this fake artists scandal. It's like, how dare you call these people fake?
Yeah.
How dare you? These are professional musicians. This is an outrage. Mm-hmm. So the real question is, but, you know, the question is the scandal of a David Guetta track having a drum machine. I didn't see that on the front pages, mm-hmm. Or the idea of a wholly sequenced track, etc., etc., or, my God, I went to see a DJ once and paid a lot of money and he plugged in his iPhone. I mean, the real question is that great art will flourish, and whether or not it's digitally enhanced or completely hand curated, the opportunity if you're able to do that, as it were. You know, I say this all the time, you know, I feel no need to apologize to a horse as I get into my electric car. So, you know, the idea that these things are in and of themselves, I find is a pretty empty argument. but everyone's welcome to at me here, because the question is that but again, the question that you've got in relation to this, without wishing to be too mawkish about it, my father was a tailor, and with a change in technology, consumer habits, and globalization, it's kind of thrown on the scrap heap. Right, the same conversations that's having with regard to Amazon, what's happening to Uber, what's going to happen to driverless cars, etc., etc., etc. The real question is how do we use these tools to be able to create what music technology is? A piano is music technology. A violin is music technology.
Yeah.
Now look, I hit a button and it makes a noise. But that's not a scandal. So the real question is how do we use it and how are we going to use it? Rather than these fairly reductive arguments of X means jobs or Y means jobs. The real question is and COVID particularly is exposing. But what happened is that the amount of remote collaboration using a mix of digital, online and AI tools has just grown significantly, leading to whole new flowers blooming.
Ted, briefly, if you can, just tell us how AI is playing a role in Delic, and then we'll get to the Q&A from people who've been watching. I mean, I'm sure it's hugely complex, but...
Well, it actually isn't. So, I mean, similar to the way Anna's described how they're using AI there, we want to take away the bits that are taking creatives away from being able to focus on creativity. So right now we're focused on metadata, and we're focused on those things that allow people to collaborate much more easily without having to fill in forms for, what the key signature, what the beat per minute is, what the, some of the technical things, because those can be algorithmically generated or deduced, sorry, not generated. And now we're going to start moving a little bit more into being able to find collaborators and to find music that sort of works with your music. And what Delic does is that it looks at music in a granular way. So it's not just finished tracks, it's stems and it's parts and it's things like that. And the ability to use machine learning to look at what the options are, when you have a part, and what the options are when you're creating music. That's sort of the area that we're moving into.
Okay, look, an hour is definitely not long enough to cover this subject. Let's go to some of the questions. We're supposed to finish at 6. We might go a little beyond 6 if everyone's watching and want to stay with us for a couple of minutes. Scott Jones says, don't we lose the random vulnerability that is human, that is the factor that our soul responds to, or do we replicate it and call it normal and done? Cliff, we've kind of covered that a little bit, but do you want to sort of say anything more to that?
Well, I defer to the musicians, but the question is how do you play it? I've seen people, play a piano with such ease and beauty and soulfulness, as it were, but it's music technology. It's using it as an instrument.
To answer that, I think that's sort of assuming that that vulnerability or that emotional response we have to music is injected into it by the musician. When actually, I think what's really happening is that we're pulling it out of, so we hear something that we respond to in music, that someone else has produced. Even as a composer, even as a musician, you're playing around with stuff and something strikes a chord with you, quite literally, right? And that's what you start to go with. And then you combine that with something else, and that combination or that pattern, or that structure, and the way those things go together, it works for you on an emotional level, on a logical level, on all sorts of different levels. But you put it out there, and then it's the listener that then does that same thing in reverse, relating it to their life, to their experience and their emotions. So I'd say that X factor isn't necessarily in the creation of the music, it's actually in the response to it, and it's completely, it seems completely possible to me that, in decades, years, we don't know, that an AI generated piece of music would also give people that sense of that X factor, remind them of their own X factor when they're listening to it.
Well, that maybe leads us on to the next one. Tom Armstrong says, could you envisage a world where machine-made music competes creatively and commercially with human-made music? If so, how far away? If not, why not? How far are we? Anna, could you comment on that?
Oh yeah, sure. Not really.
Come on, tell the future.
Well,
live on
to
Facebook.
be to be completely honest with you, it just, I completely agree with what Ted was saying in the way it relates to this question. But also one thing that puzzles me is I don't think it needs to be a competition, if that makes any sense. One thing that, as a person who's really interested in technology and has been really interested in technology, but comes from an artistic background, is that technology is a tool. And we need to remember that as well. It does not mean that we don't need to have these conversations and reflect on how it potentially affects people. In fact, we have to, it's part of it. But also remember that in the end, it does not have to be a competition. It's a tool that we created as humans and that we can manage as well. So that's important not to forget, I think. But if you really want to have a machine and a human competing, you can do that. We've done that, right? We've done it, and it's been really entertaining. And in that case, that's an exercise that we could potentially be starting to do right now. And a world where I think it's now. We're already in it if we want to.
Yeah. Okay. And Siobhan Wilson, who I know and is a fantastic artist in her own right, has answered that Tom Armstrong's comment, saying, "I believe we're already there, since much of the contemporary pop music we hear is all and produced to an extent by the algorithm." One to you, Cliff. You'll have seen this. What is shape-shifting AI? I would like to know that too.
Okay, I'm going to try and do something really dangerous and try and demonstrate some tech.
Oh no!
Live. I know. So shape-shifting AI literally changes music on the fly to fit a particular context. So I have here 4 settings on my phone. Bottom, I've got workout, chill out, and party. I can play a song. And then what I can do is change it midstream. And what the AI engines do is understand your overall context and be able to change and train and create different versions in real time in order to. So what you've got the opportunity there is literally turn music from a static linear medium to actually now something that's far more dynamic in real time. So there's a company called AI Music, of all things, and they have tools to make music symphonic. So it makes music in sync with particular ads, it makes it in relation to particular moods, and it can do it live in real time into a stream. So that's what shape-shifting music is. And
is that creating the music from scratch, or is that taking a well-known piece of music and shape-shifting it?
Yeah, it's the latter.
Right, okay. Good. I sort of understand it. I'd like to experience it up close rather than through a Zoom screen. Victor from Argentina says, "Hi, John." Not strictly a question, but worth saying, I think. Hi, Victor. Right, good. And an anonymous attendee says, "Musicians must take advantage, but what about the companies who are already taking advantage? Juke Deck, for example, generates AI music, putting a human out of a job for every video, etc. That, well, you can see the question, that its music is selected to a company. Even if musicians jump to and do take advantage, that would be musicians versus companies. Who's going to win? In the cultural dialogue, musicians will win. In the commercial outcome, companies will win. Is there an ethical line to be drawn, especially as the sum total of human music is what the algorithms like Juke Deck are based upon? Who owns the copyright to Juke Deck's AI compositions?" Quite an in-depth question there, but Cliff, that seems like your question, having worked with Juke Deck, right?
Well, I won't speak to Juke Deck, but I'll speak of it. With regard to putting the human out of a job, I would literally bet a lung that Juke Deck did not put a single person out of a job. Okay. In any way, shape, or form. The majority of the music uses they wanted to do actually couldn't get licensed. And AI music, generative music, was used as an opportunity to be able to pay for some music in order to be able to do that. What it did was learn entirely from public domain compositions, and what it did was solve a particular problem or a particular price point for a particular thing. It did no more than, it's no more a concern to popular music than McDonald's is to the Ivy. It's not an issue in my absolute view. What I did do is see that I saw a number of musicians used it as a source of inspiration. I saw people use it as part of stems and tools as part of the composition process. And that's how I'm seeing people using stems and generative AI right now, is very much in order to complement the palette rather than to replace anyone. With regard to the ownership of the copyright, yeah, everyone says, well, a machine can't own the music. It's like, well, a company can own music. And the company does own music. So it's sound recordings, provided it's all original, covered by copyright. Software, copyright and software is very, very clear. Copyright and algorithms is very, very clear. There just seems to be this sort of internal human bias that we feel that machine can't do all these things, that a company, which is actually less real than a machine, can quite easily own. So
okay.
It's not as difficult as everyone imagines.
And that kind of answers Siobhan's next question, which is, if an AI robot auto-generates a musical piece, which is technically unique in harmony and rhythm, but created in the style of Ed Sheeran, who owns the rights? The company?
This is a question I am asked every time, and it's a good question. It's not a bad question for that. The real question is actually, you've got greater risk of doing that as a human being than you have as a machine. So if John and Ted were to go away and make a song and it happened to sound like Shape of You, unfortunately, it's down to a guy in a wig and a court to believe whether or not they copied it or not. Beauty about auto-generated algorithmic, it can show you precisely the recipe that went into the notes. And if that machine is never heard, so if a machine had been trained on Shape of You and then made a song that sounded like Shape of You, it will have, in the process of listening, it would have possibly breached the number of restricted works under copyright law. But if it's pure coincidence, it's much, much easier to prove than what Robin Thicke and Pharrell had to do on the Blurred Lines case.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, okay, well, there you have it, Siobhan. Thank you for your questions. One last anonymous attendee with a slightly contentious question. I'm going to point it towards Ted here. Horses were indeed liberated by cars because pulling carts was toil. Humans are not liberated by AI because making music is a joy. What kind of tool erodes people's income for doing something humans love? A valid point, it has to be said.
I completely agree with that. I mean, I can't, I can't come up with a good reason why we would want these tools to put creatives out of a job. The reason, and that's the reason I think the alignment problem is really, really key to this, that musicians are the ones impacted by these tools, and musicians need to be involved and participate in creating them. If they don't, and I do understand the point made earlier about companies versus individuals, because there's a huge power dynamic there that we need to take into account in terms of resources, I mean, and there's power dynamics right now. We're trying to do things in Delic, in an extremely ethical and responsible way, right? But we're a small team, right? And, you've got these huge teams on different companies taking the same tools and, and welding them into these big hammers, and who's at the end of the nail with those hammers? It's musicians. Mm-hmm. So I think if we can get the people who are impacted, the musicians, involved and driving the process of making those hammers, then we go a long way to helping this problem.
Mm-hmm. John, you looked like you were just going to add in there.
Yeah, kind of an example to this. Pulling wagons was tedious. And if you go back to the days of, Denmark Street and the Brill Building, full of, lyricist and piano player churning out dreck, turning out cheesy songs, that's tedious as well. Mm-hmm. So you know what? If there are people who just want this sort of bland music that generically fits a workout or study or whatever, it's good that humans aren't subject to the tedium of writing that stuff. Mm-hmm. Let the machines write that, and then let the humans write something that's really great.
Yeah. Well, I think we should leave it there. I mean, we've slightly gone over our time limit anyway. Once again, session, we've covered a lot of ground, but somehow merely scratched the surface. Can I thank you all for taking part? We haven't even half used your expertise to its full advantage. Maybe I should have been an algorithm. I would have been far more efficient as a host. Anna, thank you very much. Ted, thank you very much. Cliff, thank you very much. And John, thank you very much. This has been Delic Session number 5. We'll see you in 2 weeks for another one. And I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to get involved, please sign up to be a founder member of Delic. hello@delic.network is where to send some emails to. Go and check out the site. And Ted, John, good luck with everything and keep us posted of how things are progressing and so on. And we'll speak to you in a couple of weeks. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank
so much.
you.